Hi. Today is Friday, January 16th. I'm Cindy Allen, CEO of TradeForce Multiplier, a global trade consultancy service. Welcome to Simply Trade, Cindy's version, where I base an international trade update on a Taylor Swift song. Today's song is Mastermind, and I'll get to the reason for that in a moment. This broadcast is also brought to you in association with Global Training Center. Let's talk about what's happening in trade this week. There's been a lot going on, which has been an uptick from the past couple of weeks, I guess, as we come out of the holidays. Everyone's starting to pay attention to trade again, and things are starting to move. The first, and I think the biggest, is that the semiconductor 232 was dropped this week. The long and the short of it is most of these are not actually subject to 232 duties. However, if you actually read the 232 case, you almost need an engineering degree to figure out which semiconductors actually apply, which are exempt. And also there's a long list of exemptions. Two of the most notable are if they are being imported to be implemented or installed in a U.S.-based semiconductor factory or some sort of data center, those are exempt. If they're imported for parts of those data centers, that is also exempt. So some good news for those that are developing the data centers here in the United States. However, it's very complicated. I'm not even going to attempt to summarize what that is. If you're in the semiconductor industry, you've already talked to your engineers and you have a better idea of if your semiconductors or which ones of your semiconductors are going to be subject moving forward. So good luck to my semiconductor friends. I know I was with someone who actually imports semiconductors when that dropped and at a conference and needless to say, he was head down back at the hotel trying to get his products determined if the duties would apply or not. So shout out to all my semiconductor friends that are navigating their way through that. The second is a Taiwan trade deal was announced, 15% limit on all goods imported from Taiwan. And it also applies to auto parts. So there's a 15% limit on auto parts. This is essentially the same as South Korea, Japan, and the EU. One of the things that I think was really interesting, again, is for those companies investing in U.S. capacity in the semiconductor industry, you can import up to 2.5 times what you are building that capacity in the United States. So again, another complicating factor that really falls outside of the normal trade process that we are used to dealing with. So I'm sure there's going to be some more advice coming out on how to implement that. I know the past exemptions like this have really been determined by going to the Department of Commerce, and there's a semi-process that's been put in place to ensure or to get those exemptions. But as a customs broker, as an importer, those are really outside of the normal import process. So that might be an after-the-fact kind of relief or exemption moving forward. Aluminum steel valuation is still an issue, especially for those component products that are actually part of a larger thing being imported. CBP Center held a seminar this week, but there is still a lot of concern and lack of information out there on how importers can really reach a reasonable care standard. I give credit to CBP for trying to answer a lot of those questions, but it's really a murky area and they are working on it. The good news is we have some flow of information between the trade participants and CBP so that they can nail down how to value those goods for importers, which is always a good thing. Communication is always a good thing. We are still on IEPA watch. Another false notice on Wednesday when thousands of people were watching the Supreme Court decide if they were going to announce this or not. They did not, so we're still on IEPA watch. I'm still saying February for a time frame. We'll see if that comes true. Looking into Cindy's crystal ball. We've also seen social media posts about duties on countries that do business with Iran. We have no details in our information. There seems to be little awareness of this possible action within the government. So they're still trying to determine what that is. In the trade, we're looking for not just which one which countries are going to be subject to that, because we don't necessarily, as trade partners, have visibility into who's doing business with Iran. That falls outside of the U.S. imports. If you're doing exports, Iran is controlled from the U.S., so you only have visibility to that. So we are continuing to watch for additional information about that and what the duty rate is going to be and what are some of the conditions that it's going to be applied on. Is it for all products? It is just what they're trading with Iran. We don't know for sure. So we're looking for details on that. Also, legislation on the Hill seems to be heating up again. There's some reports that a deal on AGOA and the Haiti Help Act might be incorporated into some other spending bills that are moving forward. That comes from the Senator Crapo, who is the head of Senate Finance. So very good indication that they are working hard on that instead of coming from, a lone independent congressman or senator. So good news on that. We are also seeing some movement in introduction of other language, specifically by Senator Cassidy and his staff. This has been an ongoing effort by them to get customs modernization, or 21 CCF legislation, passed in some way, shape, or form, giving CBP some new tools, but also laying out some programs that will enable better visibility and better technology for trade and CBP to adopt. So we're watching that, and hopefully some of those 21 CCF concepts that we've been talking about for many years now will come to pass. And it's not just all enforcement. Hopefully there's some facilitation language that comes along with that, recognizing those who go above and beyond giving information to CBP. And in breaking news, I just saw a notification that Trump has now put the idea that he may be proposing tariffs on those countries that oppose the U.S.'s acquisition of Greenland. So again, based on some comments that were made today in a forum that the president is actually attending, details on that to come. We'll see if that comes to pass or if that was just an indication that he's thinking of that. But it has hit the mainstream press and also some of the trade press that is coming out. So quite a busy week. I do have to acknowledge that I was invited to attend by the U.S. Trade Representative's Office to attend the Asia Pacific Economic Council Alliance for Supply Chain Connectivity, or APEC A2C2, in Mexico City this past week. I got to meet some great people in trade. There were representatives from Asia Pacific customs and trade authorities from the government, as well as some private sector. And of course, we had a strong contingent from Mexico, as well as Canada and the U.S. Lots of trade partners from the U.S., from the private sector, were in attendance. And I was happy to learn that I have some international fans for the Simply Trade Cindy's Version podcast. And I want to say hello to you. It was a great honor meeting some of my foreign fans, and a little humbling to tell you the truth. We started this podcast just as an idea to see if it would be fun. And I have to give kudo to Anik and Lalo for their support and help in getting this going. But it's been a lot of fun, and it's really great to hear that people are listening, one, and two, that aren't my family, and two, that it has broad appeal given the format of what it is. And it's fun. I always try to make it fun as I tie in a Taylor Swift song. I had a little bit of a hard time picking a song this week because I wanted to talk about how trade compliance is really a team sport. We have to not just rely on our own internal team. If you're at a large company, you likely have an internal trade team that you're working with or leading, and your customs brokers that you work with day in and day out, especially in these very confusing and complicated times, to get your entries at a point where they're compliant, but also within your companies. I've talked before about the importance of reaching out to the procurement individuals, and also those who are doing the logistics part of that, those who are designing the products, those who are determining strategy for where you're going to put plants, where you're going to put facilities, how you're going to import those, the flow of the actual goods themselves, and the data that comes along with that. So it's a broad base of trade partners that you have to have internally into your company. But I chose Mastermind because she does talk about none of this was accidental. And as you know, if you're familiar with trade, with Taylor Swift's songs, she talks a lot about heartbreak and about feeling alone and about being isolated and not sure how to move forward. But in this song, she's very intentional when she talks about none of this is an accident, that she actually planned this, that you know that I'm a mastermind. That's the phrase that she says, you know that I'm a mastermind. So I like to think that a lot of our trade professionals have kind of leveled up over the last year. We've had to become masterminds, not just in our own trade strategy, but in our own careers. As we have more and more visibility to those senior level individuals within our companies, you know, within the C-suites, we have an opportunity to be a mastermind of our own careers and making sure that we're bringing our teams that have come all this way with us along for that generous ride. And it's really important that you're intentional about that, not just from the trade compliance perspective, but also from the perspective of your own development as a professional, as a business person in this industry. And I do encourage you to reach out to the larger trade community, to those of us who have done this almost 40 years for me, and draw on that expertise. That's why we're here. It's one of the things I love about our trade compliance community and trade community overall is that if you have an issue, there's usually someone you can call. And you develop those relationships by going to things like the A2C2, like the APAC, like some of the trade compliance seminars, attending some of the conferences that are out there. And I know this might be an expensive proposition, but there's a lot of local groups you can look to too, to get that really wonderful trade compliance community built. And if you don't have one, be the mastermind. Here in Memphis, we didn't have a brokerage community that's very big. However, we had a strong desire by the President Amber Hagewood to develop a community here within our Memphis area. Now, last year, she drove the development of a customs brokerage association, and that is part of the larger National Customs Brokers Association, the NCBFAA. So kudos to her. She's a mastermind. And I do encourage all of you to be the masterminds, not just within your job, not just looking at trade compliance overall and the strategy for your company, but also the strategy for your own personal development, which is equally as important as you're shining on the stage. Be the mastermind of your own approach, your own career, and your own person. And I have to say that someone this week at the APEC A2C2 called me a trade social influencer, which I thought was great. So I'm going to start referring to myself as a trade influencer and see how far I get. So I'm going to mastermind that for myself. Have a great week.